Hello, my friends, and everyone interested in this ancient text called the Bible and the book of Exodus. We are going to be condensing chapters 8 through 10, where we discover that God is doing a few really intense things here. He's continuing to wage war on the gods of Egypt in very specific ways, and we're going to discover some really cool things about the plagues that we're going to walk into. God's also trying to make himself very known to the Egyptians, this God of our slaves. Who is this Yahweh God? And he's making a distinction between himself, between the Egyptians and the Israelites. I'm their God. And this is going to set the precedent so that the entire known world at this time is going to know the name of Yahweh, who was just this footnote. Who's Yahweh? No one knows who the God of the Israelites are, who is this Yahweh God, and God's about to change the entire game. The Bible's about to get very real. We might get a little bit colorful, so buckle up and welcome to Dumb Christian. Moses is taking each step only as God gives it to him. He warns him, hey, Pharaoh's going to harden his heart. Things aren't going to go just perfectly smoothly. There's going to be steps you have to take. But Moses only knows each step as he takes it. He doesn't see the full picture yet. However, as God has Moses take individual steps one at a time, Moses knows exactly what God is doing and how God, this Yahweh God, is actually undermining the theology, the religion, the belief, the traditions of Egypt, because he was raised in Egypt, right? In the palace, nonetheless. He knows of these gods. So he knows what Yahweh is doing. And what this Yahweh God is doing is he's completely going to deconstruct Egyptian theology, their own creation story. He's going to actually behave in a way that poses a direct threat on Pharaoh's deity. Now, we're going to unpack some things that aren't necessarily explicitly in the Bible. We're going to be taking some resources from Dr. Mike Heiser, John Currid, and we're going to have some links in the description below if you're watching on YouTube, where you can double check me, and because I'm relying on some scholars, some doctors who are way more intelligent than I am. We're just going to try and dumb Christian Exodus chapters 8 through 10. So God tells Moses and Aaron, go out and say to Pharaoh, all right, this Yahweh God, he says, let my people go 3 days' journey into the wilderness to worship me. Pharaoh said no. They turned the Nile to blood. You right? Remember the last episode? Well, he comes back to Pharaoh and he says, hey, you changed your mind. Let my people go, or I'm going to cause a swarm of frogs to come upon the land. Pharaoh says, you won't. And so Aaron kind of holds out his staff like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. Pharaoh says, I dare you. Come on. So Aaron extends his staff, holds it out. This swarm of frogs immediately comes out of the Nile. This is at least 7 days after the Nile had turned to blood. We assume that the blood kind of flowed downstream and is replaced with actual water in the Nile. And frogs begin to swarm out of the Nile. Again, the Nile, Pharaoh's in charge of it. It's a picture of divine order, the god Ma'at, right? Divine cosmic justice and balance. Well, here comes these swarms of frogs out of the Nile. Now, Egypt is used to a fair amount of frogs swarming at least once a year when the Nile floods. And this is representative of fertility. Now, there's a goddess named Heket. The goddess of Heket has a female body and a head of a frog. And when the Nile floods, the frogs overpopulate, and for a short period each year, they kind of have a higher population of frogs throughout Egypt. And so from time to time, they're aware of this and they're familiar with this type of behavior, but this is unlike anything they've ever experienced before, and not during the traditional season when they experience a heightened population of frogs. Now, the goddess Heket is responsible for fertility, and the overpopulation of frogs is kind of part of that ritualistic, hey, heightened fertility, conception, right? Life. She's also considered to be a divine midwife. This is going to be a callback to the Israelite midwives who preserved and protected the Israelite babies. Well, this divine midwife is responsible for preserving, protecting, and speeding up the delivery process of whenever a new Pharaoh is born. So the firstborn of Pharaoh. She is represented by frogs. And here Yahweh God is demonstrating his power over her. Now, God already took out a huge leg from underneath the table of Egyptian religion by turning the Nile into blood. But here he's also kind of like setting the precedent, preparing the way for the final plague, which is going to be the death of a firstborn, which we're not going to get into too much right now. But Pharaoh is relying on Heket to protect, preserve his son, who is next in line to be Pharaoh, because that's her job, is conception, fertility, and protecting Pharaoh, the young Pharaoh who is not yet embodied Horus, the god, the king, the god king, right, of over Egypt. And so this god produces an overwhelming swarm of frogs, way more frogs than they're used to, and at the wrong time of year. And the Egyptian magicians managed to come up before Pharaoh. And the word Egyptian for the magicians here is actually probably better understood as like a priest, someone who can go around and perform priestly duties. The reason why they're considered magicians is because they have access to this divine, supernatural power, divine knowledge on how to tap into the power source of the gods. And that's why they're viewed as these like conjurers that can replicate some of the events that God is doing, right? But there's something very specific here that they can only replicate, and they can't actually undo the plagues that God is doing. And so here they manage to replicate producing frogs, but they can't stop the frogs. This God, Yahweh, is the only one who can actually put an end to it. So Yahweh is demonstrating he has sovereignty over Heket's dominion. Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron. He says, hey, pray to your God to remove these frogs, please, and I will let you go. Please just get rid of, because the frogs are everywhere. It's not like there's a few extra in the backyard. They are in the houses, in the deli. They are in the supermarket. They're everywhere. You can't step anywhere without squishing frogs. Have you ever stepped on a frog? Sick. And so he says, pray to your God, remove this, and I'll let your people go worship. Something, and we're not going to unpack every single thing, but we're going to see a pattern here as we go through chapters 8, 9, and 10. Where Pharaoh kind of like tries to make some compromises. Sometimes he'll say, okay, your men can go, just leave behind your women and children, because he knows that the men will come back for their wives and kids. And then later he'll say, okay, your men, women, and children can go, but leave your livestock and animals, because he knows they'll come back for their possessions. And that way Pharaoh can say, at least I did what your God asked you to, but now you're still my slaves. He's doing everything he can to like try and preserve this national resource of slavery. So he says, okay, pray to your God. I'll let you guys go. And Moses says, okay, I'll tell you what, to prove to you that this God is the God, I'll let you pick the exact time when the frogs are going to disperse, when the plague is removed, so that when I pray, you'll know our God chose this time to prove to you that our God is real. Pharaoh says, okay, tomorrow morning. Moses says, all right, bet. And he goes, prays, and sure enough, the time in which Pharaoh had requested that the frogs be removed, they were. All the frogs except for the frogs in the Nile, dead. Not hopping around, not having little frog babies. Frogs are back where they belong in their natural order. But now we have a ton of all these dead frog corpses lying all around. And so they sweep them out of the supermarket door. They pile them up. They get them out of the houses. But the land reeks with dead frogs. All the frogs croaked. Ayy. Yeah, so Pharaoh realizes, okay, that ended. Finally, we're done with that nuisance. And it says he hardened his heart. And he says, I changed my mind. I'm not letting anybody go. And then there are a couple times where Moses and Aaron, at least according to the story that we have in the Bible, they just extend the staff and they bring about the next plague just because Pharaoh changed his mind. So sometimes they're given, hey, let our people go or else. And then sometimes it's, oh, you changed your mind? Well, the shit's about to hit the fan because you done screwed up. But if you know, you know. Okay, so they said, Fafo, and we're bringing the next plague, gnats. So Aaron extends his staff, and here comes the plague of gnats. Now, in a lot of our Bibles and the translations, it's going to say gnats, but the Hebrew word here can either mean gnats, maggots, or lice. And actually, there are some Hebrew scholars who say it's better translated lice. Now, gnats can be maybe like easily explained away, like, oh, all the dead frog carcasses produces, gnats, bugs that eat dead flesh. We get lots of gnats. Sure. But I think we actually lose something if we just try to explain this plague away as the result of dead frog carcasses, especially in light of the Hebrew word meaning lice. Now, Herodotus is an ancient Greek scholar. He was alive. He wrote a lot of his works in the mid 400 BC era, but he's writing his histories. He's an historian in Greece. And one of the things he writes about the ancient Egyptian priests, these magicians, is that in order to serve the gods, in order to even enter into the temple of the gods, they would have to regularly and probably 2 or 3 or more times a week shave themselves, bathe in nair, right? Just remove every follicle, be totally pure and shiny and spotless. You can't go into the temple if you have any type of blemish, if you're infested with any kind of pest or bug. If you have any, like splotches or anything, you have to be perfect. And so they would shave themselves to protect themselves from being defiled by bugs such as gnats or lice, especially lice. If you are infested, you cannot even open the doors of the temple, and these priests are now unable to worship, serve, and appease the gods, even come before the gods and request help. The priests themselves are unable to practice their Egyptian religious rites. And so God has, this Yahweh God of the Israelites has undermined Ma'at, has undermined Heket, is totally deconstructing the Egyptian theology and worldview, even their creation ideas of where the world came from and who's in charge of everything. And now their priests can't even come before their gods to plead their case, to offer sacrifices, to worship, to say, can you please help us out? The gods can no longer be appeased. They are neglected. Their needs aren't being met. They aren't being worshipped. And the Egyptian magicians cannot replicate this plague. They can't for the life of them figure out what is this divine spell. How do they summon these gnats or this lice, this pest, this plague of these bugs that infect us and infest us? We can't replicate it. These are the guys who actually are supposed to have like secret knowledge of the gods, such secrets that even the king himself, Pharaoh, Horus, doesn't even know some of the secret arts, right? And they're coming up to Pharaoh and they're saying, we don't even know how this is happening. This must be the finger of God. Now, in English, there are several words that get translated into God. Adonai, Yahweh, and Elohim. Elohim is a little bit of a tricky one because sometimes it's translated God, capital G. Sometimes it's translated God or gods, lowercase g. It just means like a divine spiritual being, especially in a plurality. So there's these divine beings who are overseeing this plague, and we don't know who's in charge. We don't know how to replicate it, but we're not yet giving credit to Yahweh, the God of the Israelites, we're just acknowledging that there's some sort of supernatural activity going on here that's beyond our ability to understand what it is or how it works. Now, these priests are not only unable to connect with, commune with, and interact with the gods, they can't themselves interact with their own supernatural powers, right? Their secret arts are lost on them. God has removed even that from them and said, okay. And it's kind of like, what's it going to take for Pharaoh to get the clue here? How many times does something need to happen? And we notice that each time it gets worse and worse and worse. And I don't know if Pharaoh's just thinking, okay, that was just a weird coincidence, or he's hoping maybe it wasn't Yahweh God who put an end to it, but maybe it was one of our gods who stepped in and intervened, and that's what hardens his heart, and he changes his mind. But they warn, they say, hey, if you change your mind again, we're going to send something worse. Okay, well, you guessed it, Pharaoh changes his mind. And in this time, it says that they extend the staff, and it swarms of flies. Again, in the English, we're trying to figure out the best way to understand what this word means. Literally in the Hebrew, it just means swarms. Some sort of swarming bug creature. Flying, creating a cloud. Like, you ever walk through a swarm of, I think they're gnats or whatever, but they just kind of hover in place, and you you walk through a big cloud of it because they just stay there. But that's what it is. It's some sort of flying, swarming bug creature. Whenever you read it, though, it should say something. It'll say something like swarms of flies. But it just literally just means swarms. Some scholars say that it means flying, biting bug, like maybe huge horse flies that are biting, or mosquitoes, or something that's not just being a nuisance, like you shoo it, you brush it off of your face. Oh, shoo fly, don't bother me. No, this is like a huge inconvenience. It's causing bites on the people, it's causing pain, and it actually, the Bible says, ruins the land of Egypt. So there's something about this that actually causes damage to the people and the land of Egypt. However, this is the first plague where Yahweh God begins to distinguish who is going to be affected by the plague. It says in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites are, the slaves are, they aren't experiencing any of the swarms. The whole land of Egypt is ruined by these swarms, but Goshen is completely unaffected. Yahweh God is saying, hey, these are my people. This is why I'm doing this, so that you can know the difference between me and your gods and them and you. He's drawing a line in the sand. Pharaoh calls Moses and Aaron again, please pray for these things to be taken away. I'm sorry, I'll let you guys go. Just don't go too far. Again, Pharaoh trying to make compromises, right, with what God had said. And Moses says, okay, I'll tell you what. I'm going to pray that this is removed. And if you don't let us go, there's not even going to be a warning next time. The instant you change your mind, there will be a plague that kills all of livestock, bulls, donkeys, camels, like everything that you use for clothing, food, transportation, it's going to die. Okay. And if you don't let us go by X time tomorrow, this is when it's going to happen. Well, Moses prays, the swarms leave and desist. Pharaoh changes his heart. You guessed it. And sure enough, first thing in the morning, this plague just ravages the livestock. But again, only of the Egyptians. The livestock in Goshen, where the Israelites are protected, are safe, are good. They're unaffected by this plague. And not only is this causing serious issues with the Egyptian economy, their livelihood, their day-to-day business, but it's also a slap in the face to a number of other gods who are also represented in these types of livestock. Bulls are regularly viewed as the physical representatives of gods, especially Ra. And many of the gods you can see portrayed in hieroglyphics and other ways are portrayed with a head of a bull. There's one in particular, Apis, who's a god of fertility, right? And this is going to set the stage and play into the 10th plague, the very last plague, which we're actually not going to get into this time. We'll get into it next time. But the God, Yahweh God, is assaulting the gods of Egypt. And it's a bold declaration to every other spiritual being in rebellion against Yahweh God, who's, like over the other nations. In the spirit world, their Twitterverse is blowing up. Have you guys heard what has happened to Heket and Apis and, all these other gods in Egypt? You better look out, because Yahweh God is coming for you too. Then God says to Moses and Aaron, take some soot out of the kiln, which is where they burn the bricks, because that's what they were doing. Remember, they were making bricks as slaves in Egypt. He says, take some soot out of the kiln, throw it in the air. It's going to become dust, and it's going to blow over the land. And as it lands on people, it'll become boils, like open, festering wounds on people's bodies. This is the last time we actually see or hear from the Egyptian magicians or the priests. I don't know where they've been the last couple plagues, but as soon as they realized we can't replicate this, we're kind of tapped out, God. Pharaoh, we can't really do anything else. But here they appear one more time, and it says they were unable to stand in the presence of Moses. Now, whether this means physically, like they're just so physically afflicted by these boils that they can't be present, they're in so much pain, or they're just embarrassed because I can't do any of these things that their God is doing. I'm worthless. And it's just like this pure shame, right? I can't even be in the presence of Moses because what do I have to offer? Moses and Aaron come up to Pharaoh and they're like, bro, God could have wiped you out. This is what the God of the Hebrews says, which, again, kind of like rubbing dirt in the wound, right? Like our God versus your God. Hey, our God is saying, I could have wiped you out ages ago, but I'm actually trying to be known. I want you to know who I am. So there's actually a little bit of a picture of mercy here where God, the God of the Israelites, is saying, I want you to know who I am. And we know also that he wants his name to be renowned through the whole world. It's kind of what he reveals here. So he's drawing this drama out. So, because I asked the question, why wouldn't God just let the plague persist until Pharaoh says, okay, lets the people go, and then ends each of the plagues? Why does he end the plague and then Pharaoh hardens his heart? Well, earlier we talked about, who's hardening whose heart? Is God forcing Pharaoh's heart to be hardened? Or is God knowingly behaving in a way that Pharaoh is already rejecting God, hardening his heart, because he's supposed to be the one in charge of the divine order? And he's just kind of saying, screw you, God of the Israelites. I don't know who you are, and I don't care. And God is using that really to build this drama so that when it comes to its crescendo, which we're not going to reach until the Red Sea, sorry if there's a spoiler alert, but that is going to be the thing that goes viral across the whole known world, where everyone's going to be talking about the God of the Israelites. Not because he forced Pharaoh to harden his heart, but because he knows this is the way to be known most effectively. He's not playing games. He wants the world to know this is Yahweh God, the I am, and he is about to step on the scene. This God who's been a no name. Who's Yahweh? I don't even know who that is. Yahweh God's about to have the glow up of all history. Okay, and he says, "All right, Pharaoh, we're gonna keep playing this game until you acknowledge that I am the God. You are not God. I am." And he says, "I'm gonna send hail. And this is going to be unlike anything you've ever experienced ever in history. And no one will ever experience a hailstorm like this ever again in history." And so as Moses and Aaron are kind of speaking to Pharaoh, they're warning and they're saying everything that's left in the fields, people, any animals that are still alive, and all of your crops are going to be destroyed by this hail. And some of the people in Pharaoh's palace panic because they're getting to the point where they recognize, wow, this God of the Israelites, he is legit and he is not to be messed with. If they have a warning, I better go run home, make sure all of my kids, my family, my servants, any animals that I have, my dogs, my pets, anything else that's still alive, bring it inside, get it in shelter because something's about to go down. And sure enough, hail, accompanied by lightning and fire. Like, it is Armageddon, like something you see only in a movie. It's the end of the world for these people, right? Like, surely this is it. And like he said, everything in the field died. People, animals, crops, except for those in the land of Goshen, where the Israelites live. There's protection there. And again, here is God, afflicting the people of Egypt to demonstrate who he is to them. He's also doing another slap in the face to a number of Egyptian gods. Nuit, who else? Shu, Tefnut. These are the gods of the sky, of moisture, rain, right? And these gods aren't intervening. How come Yahweh God is at every step of the way overpowering and overriding the power of these other gods that we've been worshiping? And it's not that these gods didn't have some sort of power, these spiritual beings in rebellion. They aren't gods. They were created by God and they rebelled against him. And they're worshipped as gods, and they have some sort of power. We see that throughout Scripture. It's recognized that they're able to interact with the physical on some supernatural level, and it manifests as power. But they don't have authority. Yahweh does. He has authority to silence even what power they do have. Pharaoh says, "Oh man, I can't take this. I've had enough." And he actually does this thing where he says, "I'm sorry, I've sinned." It's like this fake repentance. "I'm sorry, pray for me and I'll let you go." And after Moses prays and the hail, lightning, fire stop, Pharaoh changes his mind again. Moses and Aaron extend their staff, hold it out, and it brings an east wind. Now, at first, this wind might just feel like, okay, it's a nice cool breeze. Wind? That's your next attack? Ha! Hardly worth paying attention to, especially after hail, fire, lightning, right? So all day, this east wind kind of like blows through Egypt. And then the next day, the whole land is covered with locusts. Now again, just like the frogs, there are times and there are seasons where you have a few more locusts than normal, but these are, it says there were so many locusts, and in your English Bible it says that it covers the face of the land, but that's not the Hebrew word. The Hebrew word is the eye of the land. And this actually means something very specific. Again, they're in Egypt. So what does it mean to the Egyptians? Well, Pharaoh, who is Horus, the god incarnate, the god king, his one eye is the moon and his other eye is the sun, Ra. And so when it says it covers the eye of the land, it's actually saying that it blots out and obscures the view of the sun. So it's not that it makes the whole land as they're sitting on the ground, it darkens it actually darkens the sky. You can kind of see pierces of pinpricks of light through the swarms, right? But it says that it eats and destroys everything else that is green, trees and whatever plants survived the hailstorm. Everything now is just decimated. And this actually plays into the next plague, which is the 9th plague, darkness. The sun represents Ra, the Amun-Ra, like the big god, right? Because he's there all day, every day. He oversees everything that happens. He's kind of top dog god. And at night when the sun sets, it's this picture in Egyptian theology that Ra is visiting the underworld. He has left this plane and gone to the underworld. In a sense, he's died and he's visiting the underworld until the morning when he once again is resurrected and rises to new life. This is the idea of Ra coming up. He's bringing new life, a new day, something new and fresh. Well, the swarms of locusts set in motion the sun goes down, it's dark, they're afflicted by locusts, but something happens the next day. Ra doesn't rise. And it's not just because the swarms of locusts are so big. Actually, it's darkness over the whole land of Egypt, except for the land of Goshen, that suburb of Egypt, where the Israelite slaves are. And so the Egyptians are kind of in this place where they're like, well, shit, did Yahweh God kill Ra? Is he permanently dead now? And all they can conclude finally is this God is top dog God. He's bigger and better, way more badass than our gods, even our top dog God, who, according to their legend and their God theology, their structure, he wrestled all the other gods and claimed victory over creation. Well, the God of Israel is even greater than him. And they're kind of left with this question like, are we out of gods? Do we have anything left? And so they begin to like worry, and they start to think to themselves, I hope Pharaoh is going to let the Israelites go, because we need to restore balance and order. We need to put Ma'at back in her place. We need the cosmic order once again. Pharaoh, please let the people go. And so if you remember, God told Moses, I'm actually going to make it so that the Egyptians are going to give you everything you need for your journey. And this is where that is beginning to take root. The Egyptian citizens and civilians are thinking, okay, what do we need to do to get them out of here? Ra is completely subject to Yahweh. Egypt is looking for the next opportunity to get all these Israelites out of the land, and yet there's one more plague that we're going to have to get to next time. Please, if you enjoy this, check out the description. If you're watching on YouTube, you can find us at Dumb Christian Podcast. Check out the links in the description. Those are my sources. Again, they're doctors and scholars that are really smart, way smarter than I am. I'm just trying to dumb Christian this thing with you guys. And if you don't have a Bible to read it for yourself, be sure to check out, I recommend the ESV Study Bible, but I will catch you guys in the next one. I love you guys.